Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Left Book Club event. Tonight, we are doing something a little bit different. We're hosting our first online rally, Left Book Club online rally. And this is to commemorate the Best of Ben by Tony Benn. We're really excited to have some really inspiring speakers tonight or this morning, depending on where you'll be watching us. And we'll be addressing the question, where do we go from here? My name is Elif and I work on the political education and partnerships at the Left Book Club. Before we begin, just a little bit about the Left Book Club and what we do. We are a subscription book club and not-for-profit initiative. We publish collectible editions of radical books, which are uniquely available to members and posted out each month. We seek to foster a spirit of collective learning and political education. We aim to create spaces and avenues where people can learn from each other and discuss radical ideas that inform actions and practical steps, with the goal of supporting the struggles fighting for us all. The Left Book Club events have featured some phenomenal speakers over the last couple of years, so feel free to check out our YouTube video library after you watch this tonight. And while you're here, don't forget to ask your questions on the YouTube live stream chat. If you would like to become a member of the Left Book Club, please visit leftbookclub.com and click join. Don't forget to follow Left Book Club on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to keep up to date with events like this and some of the promotions and giveaways that we'll be doing. This has never really happened before, but if the stream does go choppy, please stay with us and we'll be running smoothly as soon as possible. So about this event, as we emerge from a global pandemic, the system we live in seems ever more unfit to govern the lives of ordinary people. From the new policing law to the immigration bill and this completely avoidable cost of living crisis, we must ask the question, where do we go from here? We are marking our book of the month for May 2022, The Best of Ben by Tony Benn, with this online rally titled, Where Do We Go From Here? Tony Benn was one of the 20th century's most charismatic politicians. The Best of Ben showcases his powers of original thinking and communication over 7 decades. From the, quote, baby of the house to a retired widower, he was a consistently radical campaigner on issues such as the death penalty, opposition to war, and support of workers' rights. And this online rally, asking this crucial question, we thought was best placed to commemorate Tony Benn and his contributions to the struggle for a freer and fairer system. So tonight we have some amazing guests, and I'm going to introduce them all, and then we'll have them all speak one by one. So we have Jeremy Corbyn, who is the former leader of the Labour Party, MP for Islington North, and a founder of the Peace and Justice Project. Marissa Leon Espinosa moved to London in 2014. She is a cleaner at Birkbeck and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She is an IWGB rep at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where she and her colleagues are campaigning for dignified wages, trade union recognition, and fighting against vicious union busting by their manager. Rob Callender is a community and environmental justice activist with Jubilee for Climate, a movement to cancel domestic and international debts and empower local communities to create energy, food, and social resilience. Rob began organizing in 2014 after researching capitalist and globalist responses to the climate crisis, at first with different NGOs and movements like Extinction Rebellion, before founding Jubilee for Climate in 2021 to get to the root of the interconnected crisis we face. Greg Sproston is Policy and Campaigns Manager at the Traveller Movement, a civil rights charity campaigning with ethnic Gypsies, Roma, and traveller communities for equality, liberation, and justice. Akram Salhab is a PhD student in politics at Queen Mary University of London, focusing on Palestinian history, sovereignty, liberation, and anti-colonialism. He has worked on campaigns for democratization of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and is a long-standing organizer for Palestinian justice, migrant rights, and democracy in Britain. In 2022, he presented and helped produce a news item for Channel 4 News on these topics and the wider Palestinian experience of colonialism. The link to that we will post in the YouTube live stream chat for anyone who wants to watch after this event. Sarah Laze is campaigns officer at Medact, a UK charity for global health, working on issues related to conflict, poverty, and the environment. Sarah supports the organization's peace and security and health and human rights campaign areas, and her wider work is focused on addressing state violence and developing an abolitionist public health. So as you can all see, we have an amazing lineup. And so without further ado, I want to start with Sarah. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Elif. Thank you everyone for coming, and to everyone who's put time into making this rally possible. I'm really pleased to be here on behalf of Medact and in solidarity with you all. For those unfamiliar with Medact's work, I'll begin just by briefly saying that Medact is a public health campaigning organisation supporting health workers and the health community to take action towards a world in which everyone can truly achieve and exercise their human right to health. We do this through research and evidence-based campaigning for solutions to the social, economic, and political conditions which damage health, deepen inequalities, and threaten peace and security for all. We know well that health and well-being throughout our lives is not just about individual bodies, isolated diseases and conditions. Rather, our health and well-being are shaped and determined by the conditions under which we're born and those in which we live, grow, work, and age. And yet, for well over a decade now, we've witnessed governments implementing policy after policy designed to worsen these conditions, to erode civil liberties, and further entrench inequalities. Most sharply for working class people, for migrants, for disabled people, for Black and brown people, and for many more minoritized groups. As part of our fight for health justice, we fight for economic justice, because our current economic system is making people sick. Gross economic inequality leads directly to poor health outcomes. As the 2020 Marmot report 10 years on made explicitly clear, there had been no improvement in health inequalities. There exists a 12-year difference in life expectancy between those who live in the most deprived regions of the country compared to those who live in the wealthiest. And life expectancy has been shown to be stagnating for the first time in decades, and even declining in the most deprived areas. Health workers witness the toll that poverty and economic insecurity have on patients every day. Economic policies related to welfare, work, and housing have a profound impact on our health and quality of life. And austerity policies and vast cuts made to public services have contributed to worsening health, from poor, precarious working conditions to unlivable incomes and financial instability to unsafe, insecure, poor quality housing. We've seen the targeted implementation of successive policies which have eroded the essentials needed for a full and healthy life, whilst also undermining and disregarding the very well-documented impacts these have on our health and well-being. Simply put, rather than supporting people to live healthy and dignified lives, our current economic system produces and reproduces income and wealth inequalities that are harmful to health. The urgent cost of living crisis we currently face has been brought about by a continuity of political choices, decisions which have supported and upheld an economic system which deprioritizes the lives of the most marginalized. For health workers, the work is as much about caring for those in immediate need as it is about advocating for and building new societal systems in which all are able to live well and thrive. And of course, it's not economic inequalities alone which worsen and actively harm our health. These policies are entangled with social and political injustices. We know that in order to bring about the society we wish to see, the one that we know is possible, we need to challenge injustices on every front and approach resistance work with a commitment to interconnected struggles, from economic justice to human rights to climate justice and more. It's why, as part of a movement for health justice, we work to resist the government's brutal border regime and end its hostile environment, which operates to not only uphold the violence of the border, but extend its logics and its violences into our communities, our workplaces, our places of education and of healthcare. It's why, as part of a movement for health justice, we work to resist the growing attempts at securitization of health and stand together against the government's efforts to embed policing and counter-extremism measures into health services, requiring health workers to collude with police and other security agencies, undermining therapeutic relationships, confidentiality, and trust. And it's why, as part of a movement for health justice, we need a commitment to climate justice, to safe, sustainable, renewable energies, to complete divestment from oil and gas, and to a just transition globally, ensuring green jobs and a transformed economy based on public need and not private greed. I'll end by saying that health is so often purposefully individualized. We see the government pursuing a narrative of individual responsibility for ill health and policies that co-opt the language of public health to advance government ideologies and to undermine resistance. This intends to leave us isolated and alone in facing the harmful impact of these policies, whether that's someone charged for healthcare sitting with a 10K bill and is isolated and unable to connect with anyone, or those living on an estate in Birmingham under threat of demolition, where neighbours will be split across the country, or health workers made to undergo racist prevent training, unable to speak out against it. Despite this, as a public health organisation, we spend a lot of time thinking together with health workers and members of the health community to collectively imagine health justice, what it means, what it looks like, how to actualise it. We remember those we've lost to violence perpetrated by the state, and we also take seriously the resistance work undergone for decades before us and the long-term fight for the political and social shift needed to build a just transition. Just this Saturday, we saw communities in Lewisham come together to stop an immigration raid. On Tuesday, we saw the first scheduled flight to Rwanda as part of this government's offshore detention scheme stopped, thanks to the efforts of campaigners across sectors. And all this week, we've seen migrant justice groups, as part of the Solidarity Knows No Borders network, take action against 10 years of the hostile environment. Our imaginations of what victories are possible is constantly shifting, and we can consistently win. In the face of policies which are overwhelming, we have a resistance movement that is always growing. We hold power firmly and collectively, and we will continue to. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sarah. We don't have too much time, so I'm going to go straight over to Betty. So, of course, we believe everyone should have a voice and everyone should be able to make their contribution. Betty is going to speak in Spanish, and we have Clara translating for her. So, yeah, please enjoy the diversity that we have here. Betty and Clara, over to both of you.
Hola, mi nombre es Betty Marisa León Espinosa. Trabajo, bueno, he llegado aquí a Londres desde el 2014 y trabajo en London School Tropical Medicine. Comencé en Birkbeck College trabajando de cleaner. Tenemos ya 8 años ahí y pues el año pasado en agosto comenzamos a hacer la campaña para entrar al in-house. Y el pasado el pasado año en agosto, ¿no? Y en 3 semanas la universidad accedió a trasladarlos a los trabajadores a contratarnos directo en enero. Empezamos las negociaciones directamente. Con las condiciones que siempre hemos tenido, las condiciones y las transferencias desde la primera reunión de negociación, ¿no? Y se estancaron, la universidad se estancó, ya no quiere negociar con nosotros y tampoco con nuestro sindicato. Eso se ha quedado ahí en un stand-by. Ellos escuchan a otro sindicato que no es el nuestro, el IWGB, y entonces ahí tenemos una polémica con ellos. Y ahora mismo estamos queriendo ir a una huelga porque ellos no nos escuchan ahora mismo. Hemos tenido varios problemas con compañeros que los han suspendido porque hacemos manifestaciones. Y claro, eso nos ha causado también bastante atraso por los compañeros suspendidos y claro, necesitamos apoyo para nuestra huelga y para nuestras campañas que estamos haciendo para que seamos escuchados. Clara, no sé si
Voy
quieres.
a entrar a traducir esta partecita, si quieres luego seguimos.
Ujú.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to translate literally what she was saying. Hi, everyone. My name is Betty. I've lived in London since 2014, and I have been a cleaner for 8 years at LSHTM University and Birkbeck University. Just wanted to talk a bit about the campaign that we've been struggling as cleaners and outsourced workers. Last August, we started to campaign to go in-house and to end the outsourcing conditions. And within 3 weeks of campaigning, we were able to win. But since January that we started negotiating with management over working conditions, we've had a series of struggles when the university has decided to suspend negotiations over pay grade and refuse to negotiate over pay grade. We are now struggling to get our chosen union recognized, and we are struggling to get a fair and dignified pay before the end of the transfer, which happens this August. We have been protesting over the last couple of months, and a few colleagues have been suspended for taking part in trade union activity. And we are right now in the process of balloting for a strike. We just had the results today. And we are 40 days before, we are missing 40 days before the transfer of the 1st of August. So we are trying to get as much support from the public and from direct employees as possible to make this fight worth it, to make our campaign worth it, to make our strike worth it, and to fight for a better living condition. I'm going to get back to her to see if she wants to finalize something. Betty, ¿quieres hablar un poco más?
Sí. Bueno, en abril que comenzamos a hacer las campañas, la universidad no nos ha respondido, ¿no? Entonces hemos hecho 3 protestas y han suspendido a 6 compañeros, y la universidad está persiguiendo a los miembros del sindicato por su actuación sindical. Tras la primera protesta, 4 compañeros fueron suspendidos, incluida yo mismo, por participar en las protestas pacíficas y los enfrentamientos a medidas disciplinarias. Y ayer mismo supimos de 3 compañeros que mañana tienen una visita disciplinaria por participar en las reuniones sindicales. Esto es inaceptable. Están trabajando de intimidarnos, pero la universidad juega con el hecho de que el sindicato no sea un sindicato reconocido. Hemos llamado a la huelga y estaremos luchando los 50 días que nos queda por delante antes la transferencia. ¿Puedo?
¿Quieres hablar de cómo apoyar la campaña y ya te traduzco todo?
Así, ¿cómo vamos con la campaña?
Uh-huh.
Sí. Y necesitamos cómo apoyar a la campaña, donar al fondo de huelga los sindicatos universitarios, Black Philly Foods, está en inglés, Black Philly Foods, sumarte a IWGB, Society Square. Yo creo que sí.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
So to finalize, you were saying we are quite concerned since we started the campaign about the trade union persecution and about our colleagues being disciplined. As I was saying, 4 colleagues have been suspended, 2 others more have received disciplinary actions, and we're in the process of appealing these decisions, but we are aware that the university is trying to intimidate our organizing. So we want to continue to struggle. She was saying that we are going to be calling for a strike in the next couple of days, and that you can support those workers at the university by donating to the Branches Strike Fund and to this and joining the EWGB Solidarity Square. So hasta la victoria. ¿Quieres decir algo más, Betty?
Ya, que bueno, pues toda esta lucha es por tener un buen salario, un salario mejor y reconocer y que nuestro sindicato sea reconocido y que la universidad tome ya sus decisiones con IWGB y salir y que o sea, que nos escuchen, ¿no? Que nos escuchen.
Gracias. She was saying, I just want to say for the last thing that this is a struggle for our life. This is a struggle for better pay and for better working conditions. We are only demanding to be listened, and we are also defending our rights to organize inside trade unions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betty, and thank you for the translation, Clara. It's really important to hear, especially the worker struggles happening, you know, in workplaces and on the ground. And our next contribution is by Greg, who is coming to us as part of the Traveller movement. Greg, over to you.
Thanks, Alif. And I just wanted to start by saying what a privilege it was to, or what a privilege it is to follow Betty as the next speaker. It really is remarkable the extent to which marginalised people and migrants are the forefront of the trade union struggle in this country. I was at an IWGB fundraiser a few weeks ago, and I think there's lessons to be learned everywhere about the ability to campaign in such hostile and precarious situations, but to do it with such hope and enthusiasm and joy. I'm going to start just by talking about the GRT communities in the UK today. Sorry for the slight hesitation there while I was just pulling up my notes. So the ethnic Gypsy Roma traveller population in the UK is estimated to be about 300,000 people. This is overwhelmingly likely to be an underestimate, largely driven by the fact that many people in these communities distrust the state and don't want to engage with the census or with other sort of data gathering projects. And I think it's also important to mention that the majority of the Gypsy Roma traveller population in the UK today are non-nomadic and live in bricks and mortar accommodation, because there is a stubbornly persistent belief that the social inequalities, economic inequalities faced by GRT populations as a result of nomadism, and this categorically is not the case. The situation for Gypsy Roma traveller people in this country today is pretty dire on a range of indicators. Travel movement research from 2017 indicated that about 91% of GRT people have at some point experienced discrimination simply through the course of living their lives. 77% didn't report this or seek legal advice, which again sort of reinforces that distrust and lack of faith in systems that are meant to protect people. And rather distressingly, 76% or 3/4 of GRT people have disclosed that they've hidden their ethnicity or regularly do hide their ethnicity for fear of prejudice. Gypsy Roma traveller people have the lowest educational attainment of any ethnic group in the UK. They're more likely to be persistently absent from school and are excluded from school at a higher rate than any other ethnic group. Unsurprisingly, this leads to issues well into adulthood, with GRT adults having higher rates of illiteracy and digital exclusion, and subsequently lower levels of employment and economic activity. Unsurprisingly, these processes drive persistent and entrenched deprivation, and this has an impact in so many areas, not least in mental health. In Ireland, the suicide rate of travellers is estimated to be about 6 times higher than the non-traveller population. We don't have comparable data in the UK because the NHS doesn't record GRT ethnicity, but we have every reason to believe that the rates are similar based on the similar demographics and societies that we have between the UK and Ireland. and also purely anecdotally through our community engagement. Some of the factors that I've just mentioned drive overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, despite accounting for, at the lower end, 0.1% of the population. GRT people represent about 0.7 and 0.8% of the youth and adult prison populations. This is essentially a process of criminalisation. It's criminalisation both at the individual level. Only 2 police forces in the UK have engagement strategies for GRT populations. The rest just have enforcement strategies. But it's also criminalisation at the systemic level. If you don't give people the tools, the resources, and the support that they need to succeed in society, turning to criminal activities is sadly something of an inevitability. In the youth justice system, overall, the Justice Inspectorate has reported this week that about 65% of children in the youth justice estate have at some point been excluded from school. Our estimates of this figure for GRT children is about 78%. This isn't to say that the majority of children who are excluded from school go on to criminality, but it is to say that it is a huge predictor of engagement with the criminal justice system. The direct consequences of this are obvious. It drives a process of criminalisation. You may be familiar with it under the phrasing, the school to prison pipeline. This is initially an American concept talking about the expansion of policing within schools, but certainly within the UK system, as many of the charities have highlighted, it is a process of exclusion, both formal and informal. There is many similarities in education between the experiences of Gypsy Roma traveller communities and the experiences of Black communities. These children often have their appearance and behaviour policed. They're perceived as being aggressive. They're perceived as having attitudinal problems. They're perceived as being not interested in learning. They're frequently the victims of adultification and not allowed the space to be children. And this can have a profound effect on kids long after they leave education. I'm going to read out a couple of quotes from a recent peer-reviewed study the traveller movement has undertaken, where people spoke about this in their own terms. And I'm just going to read 3 very short quotes. The effect of racism in schools is feeling that you're not good enough. That stays with you for the rest of your life. Teachers don't understand our way of life, and they have no expectations for us. Every single Gypsy person in my school went through racism. I left that school 2 years ago, and there was about 40% Gypsy people in that school, and now it's about 5%. The impact of racism, both interpersonal and systemic at the school level, will affect people through their entire lives. And in answering the question, where do we go from here? The only answer that occurs to me is that we have to become abolitionists. And that doesn't mean that I think as some people sometimes believe, that we subscribe to a system where we say we abolish the police overnight. It means that we have to start thinking in ways of how we reduce the reliance on police in our society. And I just want to give a few examples of what we campaign for and of what we recommend that people should be doing. Abolitionism is just working with your PTA to challenge head teachers and governors over their use of exclusions. It means becoming a governor of a local school to drive that change yourself. It's about supporting the fantastic efforts of grassroots campaigns like No Police in Schools and No More Exclusions to reduce the reliance on policing and police-related models in supporting our children. It's about talking to your local councillors, asking whether they oppose the Police Act, and if so, what practical steps are they going to take to protect marginalised groups from its most draconian elements. It's about telling politicians at the national level that we should not be jailing women for not paying their TV licence or council tax, and we shouldn't be jailing children at all. It's about campaigning for prevention and demanding that everyone has the access to the resources, services and support they need, not just to persist, but to flourish. It's about drawing on the fantastic support and resources of groups like Friends, Families and Travellers, Sisters on Cop Watch, and many, many more, so that you're more confident in what your rights are and more confident in intervening when you see injustices taking place. There was, I was trying to decide when I was getting ready for this event, which Tony Benn quote to use that I thought sort of indicated the way I feel about this most closely, and I've eventually decided on 2. So if anyone else wants to quote Tony Benn, I'm sorry that I've already taken 2 of the best ones. And the first is a quote that says, I think very often the boat rockers turn out to be the ones building the craft. And the other is that we are not just here to manage capitalism, but to change society and define its values. Abolitionism is common in so many areas of public life. We see policy up and down the country on things like alternatives to custody models, on community sentencing. We see it in pilot schemes. But what we don't see is a sense of this challenge in the framework of the status quo. We see it has been tacked on. And I think our collective goal over the coming decade is to articulate as clearly as possible that we do believe a better world is possible and that we can build it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Greg. I mean, it's been already so amazing so far hearing all these incredible perspectives. And of course, you know, where the question of where do we go from here, and wherever we go from here, of course, whatever it's going to be, whatever struggle it's going to have to be international and internationalist. So yeah, without further ado, over to you, Akram.
Hi everyone, and thanks to the Left Book Club for hosting this talk with so many great speakers and also on such an important theme, which is where do we go from here? And I was going to start by, first of all, trying to describe, in my view, how we got here before trying to describe where we go from here. And not how we got here in terms of a very profound analysis of society or economics or the world, but how we got here organizationally and practically and politically, and what that says about how we move forward. Because the two areas of work mentioned in my bio and that I've focused on a lot the past few years are around Palestine and around migrant rights justice, migrant rights campaigning in Britain. And in both those areas of work, there are common themes that the state and other actors seeking to dismantle and weaken collective resistance undertake in order to make sure that we can't go anywhere from here. And that's constantly to fragment and to divide, to weaken communities, to pit people against each other, and to encourage people to think of their campaigns as individual campaigns directed at individual change or small community change. And if we look at the history of Britain, that's something which migrant communities countered very effectively in the 70s and 80s when they built mass inclusive campaigns across communities on a principled anti-colonial politics that said which of the communities are most affected by racism. How do we fight collectively against its different forms? How do we unite to make sure that the communities are most targeted, within the UK, the traveller community being perhaps the most targeted in the country? How do we make sure that we're more inclusive? We stand by the communities most in need of solidarity, and we build unity around those points. The points where the state and where the forces that be bear down most hard on our comrades and our friends and our neighbours. So with that in mind, it's really important to see how we keep having attempts to fragment and divide communities against each other. And also this idea, which came up very prominently, especially around the Corbyn project when Jeremy was leader of the party, of trying to separate domestic policy and international solidarity, as though international solidarity were an optional extra that we might wish to undertake, or that, you know, some politicians on the left, for some strange reason, you know, cared a lot about the Palestinian people. We're not really sure why. All of these attempts and all of these actions are trying attempts to isolate and weaken the left. They're not just ideological points about the right in the Labour Party or other elements of the supposed left trying to hone in on domestic policy and exclude everyone outside of it, but they're trying to weaken us as organizers from the very sources of support and solidarity with which we can work together and build a stronger world. If you look at the right know this very well. The right-wing dictatorships, movements, are connecting more than ever before in practical ideas, in tactics, in solidarity networks, in creating spaces for training and development, whilst the left is becoming weaker and weaker in that respect. So when we talk about where we go from here, point number one is we stand together and we build solidarity and we unify across communities in Britain, but we understand that that struggle is international and that we unify and we build struggles internationally. When we use the terms international solidarity, often that's viewed as us extending some support to people struggling at the forefront of colonialism. In the case of Palestine, we know what that means. The Palestinian people have been confronted with 74 years of colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and are now facing an extremely dire situation in which the Israeli state is emboldened because of the campaigns it's been running in many places around the world and the increased impunity it has, emboldened to run campaigns which make it impossible to raise the voice of Palestine, to speak about the crimes that are happening against the Palestinian people. And what's extraordinary is that despite these efforts, Palestinians continue to crop up as something which is very prominent, and principally because of the campaigns and the organizing of brilliant young Palestinians on the ground in Palestine and all around the world, wherever our people have been cast living as refugees. And just as we saw this week, when we saw what happened around the flight in Rwanda, when people said, when we see the most extreme manifestation of this violence taking place against people, we stand together, we focus our energy at key moments, we try to stop these dire actions taking place, so too people see where Palestine falls in that setup. When we stand for Palestine, actually, we say that actually we're not going to engage in a politics in which we say that some people's rights are less important than others. We're not going to say that we sell these people's rights up the river in order to make gains elsewhere, because all that does, whilst it may seem practical in certain instances to do that, that doesn't actually get us anywhere, because it means we sever ourselves from one another and we weaken ourselves. So I think as we think about where we go from here, unity is the key point. And we often hear this in different ways, but it's also a practical principle about how we organize our politics. It's not just a slogan. It means that when we think about the campaigns we're building, when we think about the language we use, when we think about the models of organizing that we adopt, we think about what's worked in the past on an inclusive basis. We think about how we bring more people in, not exclude people. We think about how we build broad coalitions, as broad as possible, without losing our core principles. And much of what I learned in that regard, I learned from Palestinian history and the Palestinian Revolution. One of the posters behind me there is of the Palestine Liberation Organization, and it's the umbrella of the Palestinian people in which all different sectors of our society were included. Because without that, we were fragmented. We were made refugees living in half a dozen different countries, unable to unite, unable to come together. And at these moments of unity institutionally and organizationally that are really important to recall, because it gives us ideas about how we can do that again. And the reflection of the PLO's legacy with the anti-colonial movements also took place, as I was saying earlier, here in Britain, when we had these mass movements for migrant rights, against racism, which were connected to this international revolution that was happening as part of the anti-colonial revolution, which overturned the international order in the middle of the 20th century. How was that possible? What achievements were made, as well as what shortcomings took place? And which elements of that politics are important for us to think about and recreate when we discuss organizing today? And I think that's a really important point to return to, not only because I am a history nerd, or not because I care about that, but because within that there are certain lessons that we can draw about how we organize together. There's many threats to this, as I said earlier, different definitions of racism, and I start saying that we are inherently different, organizing only on a nationality basis, not coming together with other organizations. All of these institutions, this is a long-standing policy of the state to create these structures, and we have to counter that. There's a fantastic initiatives, as Sarah was saying, the Solidarity Knows No Borders networks. There's other attempts to do that. But I think that's the forefront of our mind. Whatever work we do on an individual campaign or individual focus, we have to always keep our mind to how we unite and how we come together and how we build and how we strengthen and we unify. And I'll say this final thing, I think, because I'm running over my time, is having moved to the UK 7 years ago now, I can say that London is one of the most incredible places to do that. Because in London, I came from Jerusalem, where obviously Palestinian society is very rich and diverse, but compared with London, where you have all these different communities, you have a huge history and a huge well of experience to draw from and to build together. And I would encourage everyone to think of being in this, at the present, quite unpleasant place to live, also as a huge opportunity, because for whatever reason, we've all found ourselves here. And it means that we can come together and build an extraordinary politics, which exists in very few places in the world. And yeah, I think conversations like this and conversations we can have outside of here are very important for doing that. So thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to the other contributions.
Thank you very much for that, Akram. We don't have too much time left, but we have 2 more contributions. We're going to have Jeremy Corbyn next, and then Rob Callender, who will make a very important and I think fresh contribution as well. So yeah, over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Elif, and thank you for inviting me on. And it's a real pleasure to be on the Left Book Club. And since I was brought up being given 1930s and 1940s editions of Left Book Club publications, and I have hundreds of them at home and in one of my offices. And it was a book club founded at a very difficult time. It was after the great crash of 1929. It was after the defeat of the general strike in 1926. And it was at a time of the rise of fascism across Europe that Victor Gollancz founded the Left Book Club as a way of giving people space to think, space to get their books published when no other publisher would do it. And they formed local left book clubs all over the country. And they were non-sectarian groups of people that were anarchists, socialists, communists, free thinkers, liberals, all sorts of things in lots of towns. And that formed really the basis of a huge degree of the social movements of the post-Second World War period, the National Health Service, the welfare state, and so much else. Less effective, I have to say, on international issues post-war than they were pre-war. But the importance of the Left Book Club was that sense of people coming together. And that's why I really welcome the new relaunch of the Left Book Club that we're looking at this evening. And we're talking about the best of Ben. Well, Tony Benn was a very close friend of mine, and hardly a day went by for many years when Tony and I wouldn't talk about something on the phone or whatever else. And I've got many, many happy memories of times with Tony, but one of them was he phoned me up one Sunday morning and read out this statement he was about to make. And he said, "What do you think of it?" I said, "Nothing," for a while. And then after a few minutes, he said, "Jeremy, you're still there?" I said, yeah, I'm here. "So what's your answer? What do you think of the statement I just read to you?" I said, "I think it's absolutely brilliant, but I don't want you to make it." And the statement was, "I'm leaving Parliament in order to spend more time on politics." It was a great statement. It was very clever, but I didn't really want him to leave Parliament, but I could understand why he was doing that. And Tony was somebody I knew for a very long time. And what was fascinating about Tony was that he would always be prepared to embrace a new idea. He would always listen to somebody else. He would always think of a struggle in a different way that he hadn't thought about before. And so his life was a constant journey of exploration. If you read his diaries, the sort of very interesting, quite pithy comments he makes about people that he met and an idea he got from them. And he was always interested in forming organizations and movements and campaigns. And I was just thinking of 2 or 3 of the most significant things he was involved with. Many on this call may not be aware that he was one of the founders, along with Fenner Brockway, of the movement for colonial freedom in the 1950s. Why? Because there was an anti-colonial movement led by people in the subjected areas of the world. Ghana had achieved its independence in 1957, but the British government was pursuing a colonial war against the people of Kenya a few years before that, against the Mau Mau people. The atrocities committed against the Mau Mau people were unbelievably disgusting. Concentration camps, physical abuse, imprisonment without trial, and so on. And so Tony was one of the few MPs in Parliament that spoke up about this, founded the movement for colonial freedom, now called Liberation, which I later became chair of. Tony was there at the very beginning, bringing that sense of international liberation by the people who've been subjugated, rather than the liberals at the other end of the scale. Repeat, if you like, of the anti-slave trade movement, which the reality was slavery was ended by the uprisings of slaves in Jamaica and other places. The liberal narrative is that it was William Wilberforce and his bill in Parliament. I think we all know the real answer to that. So Tony was about liberating people. He was also involved in establishing the Institute of Workers' Control in the early 1970s. And I got to know Tony very well during that period when I was working at the Engineering Union and he was supporting cooperatives and public ownership. And I've never forgotten the day he came to see us at the Engineering Union and said he wants us to prepare a workers' plan for the future of British Leyland Motor Corporation, which is being taken into public ownership. So we organised shop stewards conferences about how a workers' run motor industry would develop, environmentally sustainable, and all the other issues. Even then we were talking about. So Tony had always these wonders of ideas, and he also helped later on to found the Stop the War Coalition, which I think has had an enormous effect on anti-war politics in Britain. So you then ask yourself the question, where does that face us now? It's easy to say the right are in charge, the right are taking control. Yes, you've got Bolsonaro. Yes, you've got Trump still sculling around the place. And yes, you've got Boris Johnson in Britain. Yes, you do have a xenophobic, nasty, racist right. You do have the alt-right going on. You do have the AfD in Germany. You do have a whole lot of right movements going on. And it's very easy to say, oh my goodness, the right are taking over everywhere. Let's shut up shop, go away and hide. That won't cut it. And I was at a meeting in Berlin last week of many left groups, and somebody said, we need time for introspection to think about things. I said, it's a luxury we cannot afford. We don't have time for it. Because if you're losing your job, if your air quality is so foul your children can't breathe properly, if you're going through a mental health crisis because of the stress of your housing, employment and poverty situation, and you're losing real levels of income, you haven't got time to think about the future. You've got to survive for today. And so the left answers have got to be there. Be there in opposing austerity, be there about public spending cuts, but also, more fundamentally, be there about the empowerment of people. And what I like about this call, and what I like about this book, which Elif very kindly gave me, In and Against the State, Discussion Notes for Socialists, it is about the empowerment of people, because the left are actually much stronger than they realize. We're doing a project here at the Project for Peace and Justice, which is called Why We Are Socialists. See the card here, nice little red card in 2 tones, 3 tones indeed. Why We Are Socialists. And we've asked everybody to contribute to it. 500 words, $4.99 you get in, 501, no. It's got to be 500 words maximum. And that is looking forward. What made you a socialist, or what do you think makes you a socialist, and what do you think socialism is? Because it is about empowering people. Many people don't realize they're actually acting in a socialist way. It is about communities. But I just want to conclude with this, because I've got a feeling Elif's about to send me a message on the chat box in a moment, about how we reach the position we're at and how our understanding comes about. Our understanding of our place in the world is formed by media, by our social position, by our schools, by our education, and by our understanding of history. Often very narrow, and often leads you into a situation of disempowerment. History should be an exciting subject in school where our children feel empowered by what their ancestors did to end slavery, what their ancestors did to free countries from colonization, what their ancestors did to try and get cleaner air, cleaner water, and cleaner land. When you understand all of that, the arguments for environmental sustainability, the arguments for universal healthcare, the arguments for socialist transformation, which is about using the Earth's resources as we need them rather than somebody making a profit out of them, all become logical and fall into place. Black Lives Matters has taught us an enormous amount. All those people that are campaigning for all kinds of things and will be out in force on Saturday, June the 18th, in this march for social justice in London. I'll be there and I'm sure lots more will. But it mustn't end at 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon when we all head off for a cafe somewhere and enjoy some coffee and say, well, that was a good demonstration. Yes, that was a lovely day. And what are we doing tonight? No, it's got to be about how we fight back, because we have brutality at stake at the moment. Look at the way refugees are being treated. Look at the agenda of this government. Look at the way they were trying to force this Rwanda policy through. Look at the way they're trying to tear up the European Convention on Human Rights, which is a very important document. People that are suffering from the effects of that have no choice. They've got to fight back. So we fight back together. We fight back together for social justice, for environmental justice, and all the other campaigns to give inspiration to young people to be empowered to face the future, not disempowered by icons of celebrity, which are apparently very successful because they've got zillions of pounds, and the rest are unsuccessful because they haven't got zillions of pounds. Now, it's not about individual personal wealth. It's about collective wealth and collective strength. That's what Tony Benn believed and taught us. That's what the Left Book Club inspired so many in the worst days of the 1930s. The recession, the defeat, the rise of fascism. It inspired them for a better world. And we're still doing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that incredible contribution, Jeremy. I mean, bringing together who Tony Benn was, why he was so important, especially to our day today, and also the role of the Left Book Club in such a great way. Thank you very much. And our last, but of course not least, speaker is Rob Callender. Rob's going to speak to us about, we've spoken about how to move forward and what to do. And I think what Rob's going to speak to us today about is a very concrete and I think quite clear suggestion to what needs to be done, particularly to save our actual physical world, to make all of these struggles that we fight for even possible. Rob, over to you.
Thanks so much, Elif, and everyone who's spoken before. It's really, really inspiring. I just want to say I have got this sort of trauma inside me from when I last saw Jeremy speak at a rally. And after he spoke, everyone left, even though there were lots of speakers left to go. So I'm imagining this wonderful YouTube exodus because I know everyone's come to see him, but I can't see that on my screen. So I'm going to pretend it's not happening. And it doesn't matter if it is. But that's also just a testament to your amazing service, Jeremy. I don't mean it as a negative thing, but as a way of sharing my love for you and your work and for everyone here. So the question, where do we go from here? Has got, I think, sort of a very simple answer: unity, unity, unity. And Jeremy said it really well, actually. We don't have time. The left needs answers now. And that's really important. So I would add to unity, we need vision, we need strategy, we need tactics. And so I want to talk to you about two things very, very dear to me: debt and climate. And for me, they're part of a very large picture that I'm going to try and get across to you in a very short period of time. Debt is the manifestation of inequality and the use of power to enclose and marginalize and exploit. So I'm not just talking about whether you're in debt, I'm also talking about the credit of the wealthy people and where they've got their money from and how they've used capitalism to take a greater share of the commons. And I want to talk about debt because debt takes climate change from being a marginal issue to being a vital intersection point. In fact, it takes many marginal issues and it turns them into vital intersection points through unity, through a unifying place. Because climate change, although it might not seem like it because it's such an existential problem, it is a marginal issue in that it is on the margin. Climate change is a symptom, not the disease. It's a symptom of a catastrophic system that has been intentionally created and creates intentions in people. So even though it's a marginal issue, obviously not to everyone, for many people, forest defenders, water defenders, people right on the front line, right here where I live, we're on the corner of HS2. We've been defending land here for, mad projects and no longer even touting the fact that they're high speed because they're only shaving 8 minutes off a journey time. Things like that are going on all around the world, even here in the global north. At the root of these crises is this system and its history. And I think that's something really important because we often divide the history. I was recently at an oral evidence gathering for the International Development Committee's look into debt relief for low-income countries. And what's interesting is they look at debt as if it doesn't have a colonial past. They look at debt as if it's not related to slavery and history, even though we've just had that massive New York Times expose that if people hadn't been reading those things in all the other places where local people had been doing the research, the New York Times should have at least got them awake. But no, they divide it from the history. And in that abstraction, capitalism thrives and the co-option and all the other things thrive. But we actually have to stick to our history and really hold on to it because it's in the history that you see how it was made. And right at the bottom of that history, even though there are so many fronts to this battle, is debt. It connects all of the marginal issues because it is the ledger of inequality. It still exists. And obviously there are many kinds of debt. There's also a moral element to it, of fairness, of who really owes who. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Because debt is the power of the powerful. And it's through the frame of debt that we can see all of these fights together. Because all inequalities, whether it's to do with ethnicity, gender, sexuality, class, have a debt gap, a wage gap, and a sort of an ownership gap. All of these things are manifest in debt. And even if they're not in specific cases, generally you can see this. The evidence is really clear. Disability, healthcare as well. At the other end, so right at the bottom, you've got debt. I want that in the picture, this fairness and who really owes who. Because right at the bottom, we need to root ourselves in that community understanding of wealth. Because remember, wealth comes between people. Again, we often forget that. But wealth is created between people. And oil or wheat or whatever it is just a lever through which we can extract a greater amount of the share of the commons that we've agreed. Because at the heart of it, we're in this harvest cycle. It's still going. Every day you get up from your bed and every season happens again and again. There's still this harvest cycle. The quantitative easing makes it so obvious where wealth is really coming from and and how it gets shared around. So at the heart of it are these levers that capitalism has used through the debt system to enrich a very, very small minority and to impoverish a large minority, a large majority, the global majority, being impoverished by this system. So at one end is debt, and at the other end is climate and ecological catastrophe that's already happening. It's happening right now. We're experiencing it, and we're experiencing it unequally. And in fact, obviously the people who are experiencing it the most are the most marginalized, often the most vulnerable communities. And worse is still to come if we fail to change the system. So you've got debt and climate change mixed together. And the system is responding to climate change. It's just responding with talks about green growth, debt for nature swaps, it's eco-modernism, eco-fascism, lots and ways of which the system's responding. And because of this, we actually have a responsibility to have a vision. Because if we don't have a vision, we're just helping get Glencore a greater market share so they can kick miners off their lands in the Democratic Republic of Congo to get more cobalt for our batteries. So we have a real responsibility, and that vision has to come from equity. It has to come from a sense of where do we go from here? How are we organizing? All of these things bound up together. What kind of power are we trying to create? Are we trying to create a power over, or where are we trying to funnel this power to? And I would say that the power has to go into communities, into the local. Absolutely aim for the local. One of our big demands in Jubilee for climate, and the reason why it's Jubilee, the history of Jubilee is all about debt cancellation. Debt cancellation is thousands of years old. It's literally as old as we have record of debt. We have record of debt cancellation because it's not fair. But right now, debt cancellation is hardly happening, and it's certainly not happening on the scale that it needs to happen. And that's by design, because private creditors and people who, the creditors who own the debt, can take the system right to its stress point, where countries, where individuals are at the point of crisis, when they need the product, they need the next financial product more. And in countries, you see that in disaster loans, in domestic debt, you see that in payday loans, you see that in the pay it forward, the Klarna, the ways in which you don't have to pay, the way in which we push these products on people. That is how capitalism is using debt to exploit people. And it's absolutely disgusting. And it doesn't need to happen. It's completely unfair. It's completely unjust. And so many of the crises we're talking about get united by this thing. And debt is a knee on the neck of people, of communities, and of countries in the global south. And while the debt exists, so many of the other reforms we're proposing really won't add up to the big picture scale change that we need to prevent climate and ecological catastrophe. How are we going to stop them burning the rainforests when there's still 90% of GDP owed to debt to creditors in the global north, in the case of Brazil? How can we ask them to stop burning the rainforest when they owe all of that debt? Whose fault is it? And this is a really important thing. Who owes who? The global south is the wealthiest place in the world. That's where all of the wealth comes from. And it's all being stripped from the global south. So who really owes who? And there's a G7 summit happening at the end of this month on the 27th. And 26th, 27th, and we invite you, come to Parliament Square, try and take part, get in touch, and we're going to have a big demonstration, because the G7 has a huge amount of power over this. We first need to acknowledge that there is a climate debt, there is a historical debt for colonialism and slavery, and the real question here and the real change is going to happen when we, the people, unite and exert our right to say that actually debt is insubordinate to finance. The real debt is a moral debt, is a historical debt. The ledger goes back a long way. It is different from the financial debt owed to the IMF, bilateral creditors, and BlackRock and private creditors. The real debt is what we decide it is as people. And that's something that we can all come around. It's big, it's huge, but we all need to come out for each other's things. And if we look through the lens of debt, it actually helps us to be able to go, oh yeah, I can see why your struggle is part of that. I can see why it's part of that. I think we need to expand the frame to see debt and climate and ask for something bigger, a jubilee, a complete cancellation of debt. A redivision in the Jubilee sense should be the redivision of land, which is the means of production back in the old times. Let's redivide the means of production, and let's aim in all our institutions and all our works for local power and building community, because that's where the long-term resilience happens. Energy sovereignty, food sovereignty, localism. We know that we need that. So let's do that. Let's unite around debt, and let's understand that it's really, really important, this need for unity right now. It is a world-saving question at this point. We've got to get it right. We've got to get the strategy right. And I would say at the heart of it is debt.
Thank you very much for that, Rob. What an incredible, concrete way to tie up a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. I wish we had lots of time for discussion and for questions, but we decided that this was going to be an online rally where we have contributions that hopefully will trigger more thought and more discussion in other spaces. So thank you very much for everyone who has spoken today. Your contributions were all incredible. Thank you very much to everyone who has joined on the YouTube live stream. I have to say the YouTube live stream chat has been a very lively one tonight. So any of the speakers, feel free to go and have a look at it after. People have definitely been discussing a lot. Just before, people have been discussing, various issues from health to the education system, the role of media and so on. So clearly we also have viewers who are interested in many, many diverse topics. Thank you very much for joining. And I want to end before I do the wrap up, I want to remind us all of a quote by the late David Graeber, who, of course, did a lot of work on debt, but also many of the other issues that we've spoken about tonight. And that he said, we wake up every day and create capitalism. So why don't we wake up one morning and stop creating capitalism and create communism? So meaning that the power is actually in our hands. As Jeremy said as well, we do have more power than perhaps a lot of the time we realize. So thank you very much for taking part in this Left Book Club discussion. We've tried to do something new today with an online rally, and we may be back with more. If you want to become a member of the Left Book Club, go on leftbookclub.com and click join. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And while you're still on the YouTube live stream, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. One of the things we're also interested in is, the Left Book Club mantra is read, debate, and organize. So crucially for debate and discussions to also serve action and organizing. And one of the ways that we want to localize this and do more work around this is by creating more and more reading groups across Britain. So if you would like to start a reading group, you can email me at elif@leftbookclub.com, and we can send you our guide to starting reading groups and support you in that endeavor as well. We're going to have many more events coming up, so stay tuned on our social media to keep up to date. And again, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night or good rest of your day wherever you are.